Last night we had a session, and the session that we went through was all about reminding ourselves the importance of having the respect for the Buddha and also the Triple Gems, as well as being able to having the mind of having a sense of gratitude to reflect on the teachings of the Buddha. For Luang Po, he said it has been a long while since he was here in Kuala Lumpur. Obviously now the situation has improved somewhat. The pandemic is almost over. It's now a wonderful opportunity to be back here again, to practice some more, to put ourselves into the sense of offerings, the sense of puja, recollecting the Buddha Dhamma again. These are all means of helping and supporting ourselves, as well as supporting the Buddha Sasana. At the very beginning, Luang Po started the session with Namo Tassa 3 times, plus the verses in Pali. It simply means at the very beginning of any practice, it all comes down to having the right concentration, the right samadhi. This is the key to one's practice. Why is it that the Buddha always emphasizes the importance of being able to look after yourself, train yourself with concentration, with samatha practice, with samadhi? The Buddha always wanted you to have a refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha, because he realizes that when you have a refuge in something as wholesome as well as this, it will allow your heart and your mind to become peaceful and tranquil. Obviously, with the Buddha's his loving kindness and his supreme compassions, he realizes that you need the proper guidance, you need the right Dhamma teachings, so that we can all overcome our kilesas. We need to train ourselves again and again with samatha practice, so that we can sustain our concentration, our samadhi. When our samadhi is all concrete and is firm and united, we will be able to see the benefits of how things are, knowing when to bring up the sense of gratitude, knowing when things are unwholesome and unwell. The word Mangala is wholesomeness and auspiciousness. Our lives has to be surrounded with Mangala, things that are wholesome and well, so that we can do the things that are proper, things that are nobles. And then again, we need to know when things are unskillful and things that we need to let go of, so that we can pick and choose the right things for our lives. The Buddha's teachings is all about knowing the right and the wrong, knowing things that are wholesome, knowing things that are unwholesome. The main path of the teaching is all about understanding our kilesas, our defilements, knowing what is greed, hatred, and delusions, knowing the qualities whereby give rise to unwholesomeness in our heart and our mind, knowing our wrong attachments. But by cultivating and training, we are constantly going against the grain. We are cultivating, creating this pathway for ourselves to be well, for ourselves to be happy and full of auspiciousness. The mundane things that we have always been doing, yes, it may seem very mundane, but it's the main foundation in allowing our hearts and our mind to be well. For example, the practice of sila, the practice of dana. Now these are ways of overcoming the roughness of our hearts and minds. But when we move our practice onto the samatha practice of samadhi, then this will give rise to the brightness and clarity of mind. When the mind is clear and the mind is full of bliss, the mind will be able to overcome the difficulties and be able to foresee the things that are right and the things that are wrong. And will be able to give sense of purity to the heart, because the mind is pure, the mind is clean. Whenever the heart and mind is full of samadhi, only then you see the true values of who you are and what you are doing. eventually you understand that even though for now you may feel that the teachings of Buddha is fairly important, but often that comes from our mental thinking. But whenever the mind is in samadhi, you realize wholeheartedly that the Buddha's teaching is truly worthy of praise, truly worthy of respects. No other greater teachings are worthy of respects. But this can only come when the mind is peaceful, when the mind is serene. Only then you realize the true values of the Buddha's teachings. But the keys here is to try and maintain the sense of continuity in your heart so that you are practicing often. At the very beginning, you can simply remind yourself that I am very fortunate to have this body and this mind. My body is well enough, my mind is well enough, so that I can use this body and mind as an offering to the Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha. As the time goes on, you are accumulating more and more punya and more wholesomeness. Little by little, you will realize the sense and have a taste of samadhi. When the samadhi is in place, you will start to be able to release some of the unwholesomeness, foresee some of the unskillfulness, and recognize the thing that is worthy of recognizing. Especially seeing the true value of having been so fortunate to have been born as a human being. Because we are this fortunate, it means that we have to nurture our goodness so that eventually we will have that special taste, the taste of freedom, the taste of tranquilities, the taste of brightness. By maintaining our practice, we will be able to give rise to our faith and our devotions. The heart and mind constantly needs to be reminded. So when our heart and mind is bright and radiant, it means that our hearts and mind is full of devotions. Only then you will realize that this is a time to press on with one's practice. So the more you do, the more you are striving, the more diligent you are, the more that your heart, your citta, will be able to overcome your difficulties, the more that the citta will become happier. Regardless of who you are, whether you're male or female, at the end of the day, it all narrows down to the four elements. Our very body that we care dearly comes down to this earth element, water element, wind element, and fire elements. Everything comes down to having this form, having this mental phenomena. When our citta is clear, when our citta is peaceful, you will be able to see how things really are. At the end of the day, all things linger for a little while, all things appear to be what it is and linger for a little while, and eventually ceases away. This is the bottom line. Nothing lasts forever. But because we don't have the right qualities of citta, we tend to be attached to the things that we are seeing and attached to the things that we are involving ourselves in. It's just part of the nature. Everybody are like this. We tend to cling on and have this attachment to all of the conventional means of life. But one day, when our heart and mind is in the right place through our good practice, you can see that the Buddha's teachings is always giving us the right pathway towards having the true nature of things, knowing how things really are. Yes, this all comes down to practicing often again, having the samadhi, having the peacefulness of mind, so that when the mind is peaceful, you can use that peacefulness to reflect on this very body that we hold dearly. Reflect on the forms. The forms are the hair of the body, the hair of the head, the nails, teeth, and our skins. All of these things that we hold dearly in our heart, we can reflect on them, and also on the mental phenomena that we have. the Vedana, the different feelings that we have arises, the good feelings and bad feelings, the Sanya, the memories that we have, both good and bad memories, the Sankhara, or the mental phenomena that we have, the proliferation of the mind, and the Vijnana, the consciousness, the sense contacts that we have through our eyes, ears, nose, and tongues, and bodily contacts. Sometimes when people hear the word Vijnana, sometimes they think, oh, does that means the unseen beings? But in this context, it actually means and the consciousness, the senses, the sense contacts. When we understand all our form or our mental phenomena, we will have a better understanding of our life. We will be able to see that both forms and mental phenomena, they are two different identities. They are not one as we are feeling at the moment. When we have samadhi, when we have wisdom, only then we can see how things really are. Because otherwise we will always be clinging to, this is my body, this is my feelings, and my body and my feelings are expressing in these ways. And this is because we haven't got the right samadhi, the right concentration in place just yet. When we are clinging to the happiness of the mind and the sufferings of the mind, or the happiness of the body, the sufferings of the body, this gives rise to the difficulties in dealing with how things really are, especially when we are sick and when we are ill and unwell. We tend to be very concerned about our body, unable to let go, unable to have the right understanding. That's when the mind is most affected. The body has become unwell, the mind all of a sudden become unwell because the mind thinks that this body and this mind, they are both one. So when we look at Vedana, the feelings, like for example the feelings of hungry, starving for example, thirsty for example, hot, cold, these are the different feelings that arises through our natural daily lives. When we are in a good mood, then those feelings will give rise to our good mood. But when we are in a bad mood, those feelings will affect us. This is when we have this attachment to the feelings. The feelings will become part of our worries. But when we come back to our development of the mind, we try to develop the mind so that the mind will be less proliferating. It will have less fantasizing, so that the mind can become more peaceful through samadhi. When the mind is in samadhi, when the mind is concentrated, you can use that citta, that mind of yours, to reflect on the body, to reflect on the different vedanas and feeling that arises, so that you have a better understanding. When you understand it better, then you can let go of things. You wouldn't be attached to them, both good and bad feelings. Throughout the lives that we've been through, our hearts and our minds have been accumulating a lot of things, both good and bad. The good things that we have accumulated are like the dana practice, bhavana practice, samadhi practice, the various goodness that we have done. Still, when we have the clinging and attachments, we are clinging to everything, clinging to both things that are good and bad, because we have yet to have fully understood how things really are. If we can understand that the body are as they are, understanding the heart and mind, the citta are as they are, only then we can try to let go a little bit by little bit. And again, the only ways of understanding is by allowing yourself to have the opportunity to practice. Only then you can see the true value of the Buddha's teaching. Only then you will have less clinging, less attachment, less demanding in who you are and what you are. But for the very beginning of the practice, for the beginning of the practice, we always have to maintain our basic guidelines, our dana practice, our sila practice, and our bhavana practice. We have to attach to something. If we don't attach to good things and wholesome things, we'll be attaching to unwholesome things. So in times, it will not always be easy, but we have to try to attach ourselves to at least to bhavana. When we attach ourselves to bhavana, we are attaching ourselves to having the right mindfulness. The more mindful you are, the more your citta will become clear, the more you are able to maintain your sense of goodness. When you have the right awareness, your heart will be full of clarity, your heart will become peaceful. The right sati, the right awareness will give rise to a wholesome understanding. Even through the midst of your practice, you might have nimittas or vision arising in your practice. But when you have the right mindfulness, your mindfulness will be able to tell you what is the right thing to look into, when is the right time to let things be. So the goodness in our life always comes down to knowing when to do our act of generosity, our sila practice and our bhavana practice, so that our citta will be well, so that we can start going through our life with the right mindfulness, so that eventually both our hearts and minds and our mindfulness will be one. And only then you can be truly, fully confident in the Buddha's teaching and truly understand what the Buddha is trying to share with you, so that eventually you will be able to shorten your round of samsara. The Buddha have only given us the guidelines for us to walk on. He's not here to make a fuss on whether you are practicing rightly or not. He has given us a pathway, He has given us the advice where we can try to follow if we want to. Only when we can see the value in having the right faith, even just a bowing, simple acts of bowing, these are means of having the right faith and devotions in the Buddha. When our hearts and our mind is full of raptures and joy and bliss, only then we will be able to see how things really are. Only then we can start having the right views. As for now, we may have to let things be as they are, allowing the body to follow the convention of the world, allowing our mind to follow the convention of the world. But then again, trying to put ourselves back to how things ought to be, trying to remind ourselves that if our citta is well, then it will always be the key to our awareness. This very body of ours, eventually it will leave us, regardless of how well you have been maintaining, looking after your health, and all of the goodness that you've been putting into your body. Eventually this very body will leave us. But if you looked after your mind, your citta well, your citta will always take care of you. Your citta will always be surrounded with goodness if you maintain it well. Just like being here at the Babs, the people who have created this center for all of you to be here had the right intention in wanting to have a place of wholesomeness, the place of goodness, so that everybody can come here and cultivate our mind so that we can be well. I know that you've been doing a lot of chanting, a lot of paying respects, a lot of learning, a lot of Buddhist scriptures. These are all means of allowing your heart and mind to be in the right place. These are means of allowing ourselves to be contented in what is the right things to do and be able to overcome all of the unwholesomeness that may arise. Because when you're in a place like this, you look at your shrine, you see the Buddha, you see the Buddha image. The image will remind you of the triple gems. So eventually, we are still walking on this path. Eventually we will reach it somewhere, but for the time being, we have to try to be very diligent in what we are doing. All of the great ajahns and teachers who comes before you, they've also walked on the same path that you have been trying, been cultivating and been training on. But they themselves have been training themselves so that eventually they could taste the sense of samadhi, the sense of calmness and tranquility. When their minds become peaceful, they themselves also use the qualities of the mind to reflect on the body. Even then, at the very, very beginning, I've been told that some people were still skeptical about the Buddha's teachings, about training the mind, about reflecting on the Bodhi. Because we have been following this conventional way of life in this lifetime and many lifetimes before us. It's not always so easy to be able to see the truth of things. That is the reason why we need to try to follow the teaching of the Buddha as much as we can, try to practice as well as we can, so that our life will become better, so our round of samsara will be shortened. For the Buddha, he has given us his teaching, his Dhamma path, his way of life, so that we can use this new way of life in ways that we can improve our hearts and our mind, so that we could see that when things are wrong, when things that are unwholesome, when things that are unskillful, those are the things that we need to let go of, so that when we come across things that are wholesome and well, we know how to nurture ourselves, nurture our mind, so that we can follow this very basic path that the Buddha have laid down for us. So for this evening, I hope you can take back the things that are wholesome and well, and leave out the things that are unskillful and unnoble. And may you all be full of goodness and well-beings.